live?
We're live.
We're live. Welcome back, everyone. So you had two questions to discuss in your breakout rooms. The first dealt with the Panama Canal and what changes that would have on global shipping lanes. The second on manufacturing, outsourcing, reshoring, and what effects any changes in manufacturing strategy is having on your country and what you believe will happen in the future. So let's have a look at some of the answers that you guys came up with, or comments. So please, if you've designated someone, please post those answers or comments in the lobby, and we will discuss them with Dr. Arntzen now.
Let's see what they come. Come on, guys. Breakout room 4. There we go. Most of this ship. Okay.
So Igor in room 1 for question 1 on the Panama Canal says most of the shipping will go to the U.S. and that the hub will likely be located there. So I don't know which shipping he's referring to, of what origin, but he's betting on a U.S.
I'm just wondering, before I respond to that, were there other responses to that same question?
Yeah. So maybe we want to collect the responses here.
Let's hear a couple of them before I...
Okay, so continuing on, Igor's saying it could be split between Houston and Miami. Houston for chemicals and Miami for containers.
Let's see, I'm going to close the room and see if we can get everyone else back.
Okay.
So thank you for that, Igor. Somebody else want to post their answers or comments?
Bring them back.
Question 1.
Can you go into room 4 and see if we can get an answer?
So you've only got one response so far.
Yeah, so far from breakout room number 1.
If you get another one immediately, then I'll wait, but otherwise I'll comment on this.
Okay. Looks like we haven't received another answer.
Okay,
here.
so let me, thanks Igor. So interesting, if you think about in the world today, what places serve as international transshipment hubs, right? And so the three that come to your mind are going to be Singapore, Panama, and Dubai. And interesting, in each case, this is they're a tiny country that is business friendly, that is not a big player on the world stage. I mean, they're not throwing their weight around. They don't have a big military. They're not a threat to anybody. Yeah. So, and I kind of think that that's one of the ingredients to making a very successful international hub, is that you're essentially just a place that's friendly to business. You're not, so I'm worried about the idea that it will actually be in any of the big countries, in China or in the United States, or in any of the big major players, because the minute you go into any of the big major players, there's also some politics, there's some military stuff going on, right? So, so I guess I'm thinking that the hub would be more likely to be in some place that's not in the U.S. Yeah. So that's just a thought. Now I'm thinking mainly about container flow, but Igor is right about chemicals. Some of the places that are candidates to be the hub are not equipped to handle chemical flows at all. But the ships that, as the Panama Canal got wider, most of the ships that we think about, the new Panamax size ship, right, the 18 containers wide instead of being 13 containers wide, those are container ships. And so when I was talking about a hub, I was thinking of a hub for container ships. So so even though the United States is the big customer in that area, I'm not sure that the hub is actually going to happen in the United States. Okay. Another comment on Miami. So interesting now, besides Miami being inside the United States, certainly the peninsula of Florida sticks out there into the Caribbean, but the peninsula of Florida has some challenges. It was interesting, while we were on break, my mother called. My mother lives in South Florida, and she was telling me that the bus had just arrived to evacuate her and all the people in her nursing home, because the hurricane is only 50 miles away now, and they're starting to move out, right? So that's always an interesting challenge. But South Florida is, in 15 years, there'll be water in the streets. It's sinking. The water level is rising. And so the question is, do you want to invest a lot of infrastructure in a place that's going to have a lot of challenges with rising sea levels? Interesting that a lot of engineering firms from the Netherlands, of course, the Netherlands has a lot of its territory that's under sea level. A lot of the Dutch engineering firms are now selling nice projects in South Florida because as you do construction, buildings, and so forth, infrastructure, you have to keep in mind that within some number of years it's going to be below sea level, right? So, so I'm not sure that Miami is going to develop into the hub. I'm not sure where it is going to be, but I'm not sure it's going to be Miami. Any more responses yet?
Yeah, we got a few here. Room 4 by Big Highlander says, we thought there would be consolidation into one or of more hubs, but the exact hubs are hard to determine. Possibly Cuba, Bermuda, or an eastern U.S. port. Now, the question you discussed, the eastern U.S. port, specifically Miami, and you mentioned that probably a more neutral, a geopolitically neutral country, one with a welcoming business environment is more likely. But what about Cuba and Bermuda?
Yeah, so Bermuda's way too far to the east. I think that the resort hotels and everything there, that's probably the last thing they want is these ugly container ships to show up with gantry cranes and everything. But the question is, if it's not going to be in the United States, what other spot around there lends itself to this, right? And of course, 6 months ago, we would have never been talking about Cuba. The sense that I get from talking to other folks is that Cuba is in the right location, but they don't think that it's going to evolve that fast into the big hub. There's other challenges. There's still questions about the government down there is becoming more friendly to the U.S., but in terms of level of corruption and other things, there's still some challenges to work through in Cuba. The two places that people talk about the most is Freeport with the Bahamas and Kingston, Jamaica, two places that very much want to be the hub, okay? But in each of these cases, there's a lot of infrastructure that needs to be put in place for that to happen. So they are competing, absolutely. Kingston and Freeport are competing to be the hub. It remains to be seen if the big ships are going to, in fact, adopt that as their location. What has to happen is, of course, the terminal facilities have to be expanded enormously. And then feeder lines, smaller ships that go back and forth between the hub and Savannah, the hub and Charleston, the hub and Norfolk, and so forth. So all those feeder lines are not in place right now, and that would have to develop, and that's not developed yet.
Yeah. Great. Should we move on to the next question now? Because we don't have much time left.
The sourcing question.
Yeah, the sourcing question. So please post your answers to the sourcing question in the lobby now, and we'll discuss that.
I think there was one up above, Aldegundo.
Copy, paste that one.
No, that's not this. There's a question at the bottom if you want it.
So Luis says here, answering what is the main cause of bringing manufacturing back to home? Raise in currency rate, raise in labor cost, or oil price? So he's raised issues of input prices here, as well as exchange rates.
And you don't know what country he's from at the moment, do you?
No,
Okay.
Luis hasn't specified.
Okay. Well, of course, interesting things have happened over the last 20 years with all the outsourcing to China. The labor cost there has gone up a lot. The price of energy in the United States has gone down a lot. Okay, and so manufacturing is moving around. A lot of it in the lesson that I teach, that the students would have seen, is that some things are moving to other places in Southeast Asia, like shoes and apparel and so forth. Some things are moving to Mexico. Mexico is probably, in our area of the world, Mexico is probably the biggest winner from manufacturing now on the move. A lot of things are moving into Mexico because it's close to the U.S., it's close to where the big market is, right? Some manufacturing is coming back to the U.S. Because the labor costs in China are not so amazingly cheap as they used to be. And also the price of energy in the United States is low and is probably going to stay low for a long time. But of course the challenge is that when the jobs come back, they're not the same jobs that left. We had an example in the lesson about GE's appliance part, that the wage rate of the jobs that have come back is much lower than the wage rate when they left. That they used to be $20 to $30 per hour for a worker in one of those factories. Now they're between $10 and $19 an hour, something like that, for when they come back. And also robotics. The number of jobs, the jobs of lifting things, the jobs of cutting things, the jobs of moving things, all of those things have been automated.
Yeah.
And so even in our own hometown here of good old Boston, there's a big factory that used to employ thousands of people. And that factory is up and running. It's full tilt. But how many people are working there? Not too many. The people that are working there are the mechanics that keep the machines running and do the maintenance on the different automated manufacturing machines, right? Yeah. There's still a lot of people, fortunately, in supply chain jobs doing forecasting and materials planning and so forth. But the people who are out on the line have pretty much been replaced by automation. So even as manufacturing does come back to some of these countries, it's not the huge employer that it was 25 years ago. Things have changed quite a bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I can provide another example of that. A former student who now works for one of the larger sports manufacturing goods companies. They produce sneakers, for example. And most of the sneakers they were manufacturing were in China. They just recently built a manufacturing facility here in the United States, and that is almost entirely automated. So they've reached a point where these sneakers, where you had a long line of Chinese workers, gluing things together, putting them together.
Sure.
It's completely automated now. Machines can do that. So yes, it's being nearshored, you mentioned. However, it's not really generating the kind of jobs that politicians like to think.
That's right. And they factory.
Yeah. So a few other answers here. Someone provides an interesting point. Van Hongda says here that one example for reshoring is Samsung leads the retreat from China, pulling all of its supply chain out of China to SEA and leading to several suppliers going bankrupt. And other phone makers are following the trade, as Huawei and Apple for India. One major driver is the high properties bubble in China. We have also seen the reshoring in other regions as more big companies are bringing back final assembly. The benefits of being an LCC, low-cost country, is getting marginal, considering the long lead times as well.
Interesting. So that they make the point that Samsung is pulling out of China and moving to other places in Southeast Asia. Other places in Southeast Asia have not seen the rapid rise of salaries, and so the labor cost is still attractive in those kinds of countries, right? And yeah, interesting, the property bubble in China, especially near the coastlines where all the manufacturing was being done. I know China has a huge push underway to move people inland, to get manufacturing inland, and the new Silk Road, or the Iron Silk Road, they're talking about this corridor with rail connections that go from India, eastern China all the way through Russia and into Europe. Yeah. They're trying to develop that interior corridor to match what had earlier been done on the coastlines. So it'll be interesting to see how much manufacturing moves to the interior of China to fulfill that. The transit time from the interior of China through the new rail connections will be much shorter. Instead of the 30 days or more that it took to go by ship through the Suez Canal and so forth, it could be 5 days or something like that. I've seen people claiming it'll be 2 days, but I don't know if a train will go that fast. But that's a much faster lead time, and it'll be very interesting in our lifetimes to watch that corridor develop.
Yeah.
Because right now there's great plans. The challenge, of course, is that a lot of those railroads, the tracks are different widths and so forth, and so you have to figure out: are we going to move track around, or are we going to have the type of rail cars that can adjust the width of their wheels? I'm sure that's not cheap to have a rail car that can do that. So, but that's what the plan is.
Great. Let's take one more now, because we're running out of time here. Aldegundo says the country impacts when manufacturing went to Asia need to consider: one, the countries have the internal manufacturing processes or know-how; two, global business manufacturing. So when global business enters into the country, many small local players lose market share. And so the last years the global went to Asia, and it led the internal manufacturing to rise. However, getting these days a better market share in other countries. What do you think of that?
So make sure I understand the question. The concern is that when a global manufacturer moves into a country, a local manufacturer there is put at a disadvantage.
Yeah, exactly.
That's probably true. Hopefully, the economists all say that labor is mobile, right? That the worker who got laid off from the local business will get a job with the global business that moves in. That's not always true, but I think in general, when a global business moves into a country, it's usually welcomed because they want the jobs that are moving in there, right? And in terms of having the internal capabilities to do manufacturing and so forth, of course, different countries have different levels of infrastructure, and infrastructure was one of the things that makes a country much more attractive for manufacturing. Of course, that was China has a lot of new great infrastructure. The United States infrastructure needs a lot of investment to get back to that part of that political debate that's going on. Our election is investing in infrastructure, which we need to be able to do. I don't know how big of an influence all those things have. I think that the labor costs, energy costs, and the transit time are probably some of the biggest things. Now, the speaker also, the question also was about currencies. As everybody knows, at the moment, the U.S. dollar is very strong, and other currencies are weak against the dollar. And of course, that changes from year to year. Things will reverse itself at some point, right? But of course, it makes U.S. manufactured goods much more expensive to people in other countries, and it also makes the goods made in other countries much less expensive. So at the moment, it's in favor of manufacturing in less low-cost countries because their goods look like a real bargain to come into the U.S. So there is a kind of a silver lining in the fact that that the U.S. currency. The only thing that is interesting, my students tell me this all the time, if they're actually going to come to school here and pay money in the United States, it appears much more expensive than it did a few years ago. And that's a real hardship for many students who want to come and study in the United States.
Absolutely. So this raises a lot of other questions about globalization, the effects of globalization, who gains, who loses. These are topics that politicians are very interested in.
It's always controversial.
Yeah.
It's always controversial. Everyone's convinced every new free trade agreement means that my job is going to go away. It's going to go to some other country, right?
Exactly.
And the politicians, of course, like to feed on that, to work up the populace. Even though in general the trade agreements are good for the country, the politicians love to hype the fact that some jobs are going to get lost.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think this concludes the third Hangout event. We'd like to thank Dr. Arntzen for joining us, for answering your questions. And now the link to this, to the recording on YouTube will be made available
Within 1 hour.
within 1 hour, and will be available in the discussion forum on MITx and the platform. Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to your attendance in the next Hangout session, which will be, well,
19.
the 19th, which I think will involve the review of the Scream game, the results of the Scream game. And Professor Yossi Sheffi will be here as well to discuss risk and resilience. So thank you, everyone.
And let me just say that I know a lot of you are pursuing the MicroMasters and eventually want to do all 5 courses. And I'm the guy who's going to be looking at your application someday, and I wish you good luck. I hope it goes well. I look forward to seeing a lot of great applications from you folks. Good luck.
Thank you, Doctor. Goodbye, everyone.
1 second.